Hello and welcome back to episode 7 of our series, Forgotten Family Recipes of America. But today, we're taking a step away from the humble kitchens of survival and stepping into the lavish dining halls of America's wealthiest families during the roaring 1920s. These aren't just recipes, they're whispers from a forgotten world. A world where silver trays carried glistening ducks, lobsters bathed in cream, and flaming desserts stunned guests into silence. But somewhere between the fall of empires and the crash of 1929, these elite dishes vanished, lost to time, excess, and changing tastes. So buckle up, because in this episode, we'll uncover the luxurious secrets of America's past, starting with a dish so rich in history and flavor, it once defined high society. If there was ever a dish that screamed elegance in the Gilded Age, it was duck à l'orange. Imagine this golden roasted duck, crisp to perfection, drizzled in a glossy orange glaze that shimmered like liquid gold beneath the dining room chandeliers. This wasn't just food, it was status on a silver platter. But where did it come from? The roots of duck à l'orange trace back to French royalty, but in 1920s America, it became the darling of elite dinner parties. French cuisine was all the rage among upper-class Americans who wanted to show they were not just rich, but cultured. And nothing impressed the guests like a perfectly plated duck, sweetened with citrus, balanced by bitter orange peels and paired with a fine burgundy. Preparing this dish wasn't for the faint-hearted. It required precise timing, mastery of sauces, and of course, access to the best duck, often farm-raised and flown in fresh. The orange sauce wasn't simply juice. It was a reduction of caramelized sugar, white wine vinegar, orange zest, and veal stock. Some even flamed it tableside with Grand Marnier for added flair. Back then, it was common for hostesses to hire a private chef or have the household cook trained in French culinary techniques just to pull off meals like this. And while we now see duck as a luxury, in those days, it wasn't just a delicacy, it was a performance. But after the Great Depression hit, such extravagant meals were swept away. Duck à l'orange faded into memory, surviving only in the pages of vintage cookbooks and the occasional upscale French bistro. And now, we're bringing it back, reminding the world that America's forgotten food history wasn't always about survival. Sometimes, it was about spectacle. Welcome back to the opulent kitchens of forgotten America. After the citrus-kissed splendor of duck à l'orange, we now step into the buttery, brandy-soaked realm of lobster Newburg, a dish that once reigned supreme in the grand hotels and upper-crust parlors of the 1920s. Born in New York's legendary Delmonico's restaurant during the late 1800s, lobster Newburg found its golden era in the early 20th century. By the roaring 20s, it was a cornerstone of high-society dining. But it wasn't just the lobster that made this dish famous, it was what they did with it. The lobsters were steamed fresh, no shortcuts, no frozen meat. The tender chunks were then bathed in a sauce so rich, it bordered on decadent. Heavy cream, clarified butter, cognac or brandy, egg yolks, and a hint of cayenne pepper for a delicate heat. Once simmered to perfection, the mixture was poured over buttered toast or puff pastry and served with a flourish. But here's what's fascinating. This was a performance dish. Prepared tableside in many fine establishments, diners would watch as chefs flambéed the cognac and finished the sauce in front of them. It was culinary theater, a spectacle to match the jazz age. Yet as the Great Depression loomed and economic hardship spread, dishes like lobster Newburg quickly vanished. Lobster, once considered a poor man's food in the 1800s, had skyrocketed in price and status. Cream and brandy became luxuries few could afford. By the 1930s, this masterpiece of opulence had become a ghost in America's culinary memory. Today, it's hard to find an authentic version of this dish unless you're deep inside a classic East Coast establishment or recreating it from a vintage cookbook. But lobster Newburg remains a testament to the indulgent tastes of a forgotten elite, a buttery, boozy memory from America's gilded kitchens. After the elegance of lobster Newburg, we move to another dazzling dish once synonymous with American affluence, oysters Rockefeller. First served in 1899 at Antoine's restaurant in New Orleans, this rich recipe carried well into the upper-class dinner parties and hotel banquets of the 1920s. It wasn't just a seafood dish, it was a status symbol, signaling wealth and refined taste. The original recipe remains a secret to this day, but most historians agree it was built on a bed of finely chopped greens, usually parsley and spinach, mixed with breadcrumbs, butter, herbs, and a splash of anise-flavored liqueur like Pernod. These ingredients were layered generously over freshly shucked oysters and then broiled until bubbling and golden on top. Imagine sitting in a marble-lined dining room, a silver platter of these sizzling oysters arriving at your table with a scent so rich, it rivaled any perfume. The name, Rockefeller, wasn't chosen lightly. This dish was meant to be as rich as the man himself, a tribute to America's most powerful tycoon of the Gilded Age. It became a cultural marker, served at political banquets, debutante balls, and coastal mansions, often accompanied by champagne. But like so many opulent dishes of the era, its presence faded as the Great Depression swept across the country. With oysters becoming harder to find and more expensive, and luxury greens being replaced by whatever could grow in backyard gardens, oysters Rockefeller was shelved by most American families, especially as rationing took hold during the war years. Today, it's a rare treat, served only in heritage restaurants or by devoted home cooks resurrecting its forgotten glory. But make no mistake, in its heyday, this dish was a star, a baked jewel that defined the extravagant dining culture of pre-Depression America. If there was ever a dish that embodied elegance, craftsmanship, and pure culinary drama, it was beef Wellington. During the early 20th century, particularly the 1920s, this dish graced the tables of America's elite with pomp and ceremony. It wasn't just a meal, it was a statement. Named in honor of the Duke of Wellington, this British-born dish found a passionate following in the United States during the Roaring Jazz Age. With French cuisine rising in popularity among wealthy American families, beef Wellington became the go-to centerpiece for celebratory dinners, high society banquets, and even holiday feasts. But what made this dish such a spectacle? It begins with a center-cut beef tenderloin, one of the most expensive cuts of meat, coated in a layer of rich mushroom duxelle, a finely chopped mixture of mushrooms, shallots, herbs, and butter. Sometimes a luxurious slathering of foie gras or pâté was added before it was all wrapped in a blanket of puff pastry and baked to golden perfection. When sliced at the table, the outer crust flaked delicately to reveal the pink, juicy center, surprising and impressing guests in equal measure. It wasn't just food, it was theater on a plate. Throughout the 1920s, the dish was often served with Brussels sprouts in brown butter, or carrot puree with a touch of honey and nutmeg. Champagne or Burgundy wines were customary companions. But like many of its elegant peers, beef Wellington slowly faded from the spotlight. The Great Depression made tenderloin and fine pastry luxuries few could afford. Wartime rationing further distanced Americans from such extravagance. And over time, the complex preparation made simpler dishes more attractive. Today, it's a dish mostly seen on gourmet menus or cooked by chefs with a taste for history. But in the golden age of 1920s America, beef Wellington was the crown jewel of any banquet, a symbol of wealth, refinement, and tradition. Now let's dive into the fifth forgotten masterpiece of America's high society kitchens, turtle soup, once a symbol of Southern elegance and extravagance. During the early 1900s and leading into the 1920s, turtle soup wasn't just a dish, it was a culinary statement. Served at the finest banquets in cities like New Orleans, Charleston, and even up through Washington, D.C., this rich, slow-simmered delicacy was a staple of high-class Southern hospitality. Today, it's almost completely vanished from modern menus. So, why turtle? At the time, green sea turtles were plentiful and prized for their tender, flavorful meat. Cooks would simmer the meat for hours with wine, lemon, tomato, and a bouquet of herbs, creating a broth so flavorful it was said to taste like wealth. In some versions, the broth was thickened with a roux, while others leaned into a more consommé-style soup, clear, complex, and deeply aromatic. And here's a twist. Many restaurants offered mock turtle soup for those who couldn't afford the real thing. This clever substitute used calf's head and organ meats to mimic the taste and texture of turtle, proof of how iconic the flavor had become. By the mid-20th century, turtle soup began disappearing. The decline was caused by environmental concerns, changing palates, and strict hunting regulations to protect sea turtle populations. Today, few people even know it existed, let alone that it was once a dinner table staple among the elite. But in its heyday, it was the kind of dish that made your guests raise their eyebrows with delight, and made your household the talk of the town. And now, as we prepare to serve our sixth forgotten dish, get ready for a truly golden showstopper of old money luxury. The next recipe was once the crowning glory of East Coast dining halls, baked to perfection and carved tableside. Curious? Now we move to the sixth forgotten masterpiece on our list, duck à l'orange, a dish that once symbolized opulence and culinary sophistication during America's Gilded Age. This wasn't your everyday Sunday dinner. Duck à l'orange was a statement. It told guests that you were well-traveled, wealthy, and understood the fine balance of flavors from French cuisine. During the late 1800s and into the 1920s, this citrus-glazed duck graced the tables of New York elites, railroad barons, and the new class of American millionaires who modeled their dining habits after European nobility. But how did a fancy French recipe land on American soil? It came through the influence of French chefs hired by the rich, who were determined to impress their guests with a symphony of flavor and elegance. The dish combines slow-roasted duck with a sweet yet tangy orange sauce, often fortified with cognac or wine, and served with precision over carved porcelain platters. However, what makes duck à l'orange particularly fascinating is its slow disappearance. By the 1950s, changing tastes, the rise of processed foods, and a decline in formal dining pushed this once lavish dish into obscurity. What was once served at banquets and high-end hotel restaurants was now too elaborate for the average post-war American family kitchen. But this isn't just a tale of forgotten food. It's a window into how America once dined, when meals were experiences, not just obligations. Duck à l'orange was as much about the ritual as it was about the flavor. The slow roasting, the basting with citrus, the fragrant sauce reduction, it was culinary theater. So next time you see a duck breast on a menu or orange zest in your spice rack, remember, you're brushing against a gilded legacy that once dazzled the nation. Now we move to the eighth forgotten gem of Gilded Age dining. Deviled crab in shell, a dish that once graced the fine tables of East Coast mansions and seaside resorts. This was no casual snack. No, this was the culinary embodiment of coastal elegance. In the 1920s, crab meat was considered a rich delicacy in upper-class households. Especially in places like Charleston, Savannah, and New York's affluent coastal communities, deviled crab was a way to turn fresh seafood into a gourmet masterpiece. But here's what made it unforgettable: presentation. The meat was removed, seasoned, and mixed with rich cream, mustard, herbs, a hint of sherry, and delicate breadcrumbs, and then, it was returned to the cleaned crab shell, baked until golden. Yes, served right in the shell. This was drama on a dinner plate. Imagine elegant silver platters brought out by uniformed staff, each one holding a gleaming crab shell filled with warm, buttery stuffing. A touch of paprika, a sprig of parsley, and a side of lemon. It was indulgence, pure and simple. And for the elite? It was also symbolic. Serving crab this way wasn't just about taste, it was about status. If your kitchen could clean and reuse shells for individual servings, it showed sophistication, culinary finesse, and a whole lot of help behind the scenes. Over time, as fast food culture took over and dining out became less formal, this dish faded from memory. Today, very few people have even seen deviled crab presented this way, much less tasted it. But now, we've brought it back into the spotlight. Stay with us, because the next dish is a sweet surprise that once lit up high society tea tables. You won't want to miss what comes next. As we approach the final courses of our Gilded Age culinary journey, one cannot forget the dramatic flair of Cherry's Jubilee, a flambé dessert that once dazzled dinner guests and stole the spotlight at grand soirees. This decadent dessert was invented in the late 19th century but truly flourished during the Roaring '20s, when showmanship and elegance were everything. Picture a silver platter carried through the dimly lit dining room, cherries drenched in a sweet liqueur, set ablaze right at the table, flames flickering and casting a warm glow on the guests' eager faces. The recipe is simple but striking: ripe cherries simmered in sugar and Kirschwasser or brandy, then ignited to create a spectacular flaming sauce served over vanilla ice cream. This combination of warm, boozy fruit and cold, creamy ice cream was the ultimate indulgence, perfect for the elites seeking both flavor and theater. In an era without television or internet, dinner parties were the prime source of entertainment, and desserts like Cherry's Jubilee brought excitement and sophistication to the table. The dramatic flames symbolized luxury and exclusivity, making it a favorite among the wealthy. However, as tastes evolved and dining became more casual post-Depression, such flamboyant presentations began to fade, and this once-beloved classic slipped into obscurity. Today, few remember the theatrical delight of Cherry's Jubilee, but revisiting this dessert invites us to savor not just the flavors but the spirit of an era when dining was an art form. Stay tuned for the final dish in our series, a recipe that perfectly encapsulates the extravagance and decadence of the Gilded Age. Don't miss it! As we wrap up this delicious journey through the forgotten gourmet delights of America's Gilded Age, it's clear that these recipes were more than just food. They were symbols of elegance, creativity, and the lavish lifestyles of a bygone era. From the rich duck à l'orange to the dramatic Cherry's Jubilee, these dishes tell stories of a time when dining was an event, a performance that brought people together in moments of joy and celebration. If you've enjoyed discovering these lost treasures of culinary history, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating episodes like this one. Your support helps us bring these forgotten recipes back to life and share the rich heritage of America's kitchens. And if you haven't seen the earlier episodes in this series, covering other incredible forgotten recipes from low and medium-class families, make sure to check them out. We've left the links in the comment section below for your convenience. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through time and taste. Leave your thoughts, questions, or your own memories of these dishes in the comments. We love hearing from you. Until next time, keep cooking, keep exploring, and keep the flavors of history alive. Now, let's unveil the seventh forgotten treasure from America's opulent past: oyster patties. These weren't just food, they were status symbols, bite-sized testaments to elegance and wealth during the roaring 1920s. Served at high society banquets and luxurious ballroom gatherings, oyster patties were the hallmark of fine entertaining in Gilded Age America. So, what were they? Imagine delicate, flaky pastry shells, golden, buttery, and crisp, filled with a rich, creamy stew made of freshly shucked oysters, sautéed mushrooms, and a touch of sherry or white wine. Often, a hint of nutmeg or cayenne was stirred in to give the filling a warm, surprising depth. The oysters, locally harvested along the eastern seaboard, were considered both abundant and exquisite in flavor back then. These patties weren't just appetizers, they were conversation starters. Served on silver trays by gloved servants, they stood proudly beside crystal goblets of champagne and ornate plates of truffled eggs. They whispered of wealth, whispered of elegance, and yet, over time, they vanished from the modern menu. Why did they disappear? Well, several reasons. The Great Depression made such ingredients a luxury most couldn't afford. As oysters became less accessible and more regulated, the tradition of crafting these elegant patties quietly faded into obscurity. They became a whisper of a bygone age, a dish now rarely seen outside of century-old cookbooks or dusty menu archives. But today, as we look back, these forgotten bites remind us how food once painted a portrait of class and celebration. And maybe, just maybe, they deserve a seat at our table once more. And speaking of long-lost elegance, what came next on the menu might surprise you. It's a dish both rustic and refined, and it might just be the boldest twist of the entire era.